You might think that's true, but is it? What evidence base is there amongst experts to think that that is a reasonable thing to take on? So a lot of our feedback will be along those lines. And so this will be getting you to think about how you can do that as well as possible. And Julian will say in week 5 of the course, the entire week is dedicated to you thinking about how do you structure arguments and just trying to get you to deepen your thinking on that. And so this is a little bit of a crash course, and so a lot of this, will be in week 5 as well. So if your brain is exploding with the demands of VCE, it's okay because you'll have an opportunity to do a little bit of this again in the future. So don't worry if you haven't digested everything. But I think it's pretty straightforward. All right, let's jump in. I hope that you can see that. So what are we talking about when we talk about critical thinking? I just thought there's a couple of nice points to make about the language.
Sorry, could you make that a bit bigger there, Will? Sorry. It's just a yeah,
It
that's
is that
that's
small.
great. Yeah, that's excellent. Great.
I didn't do anything then.
Well, that's
Um,
great. Whatever you did then, yeah.
oh, okay. Sorry, I'll go back here. So
Oh, now it's
critical.
gone back.
Oh, has it? Sorry. Sorry, there's a bit too
Thanks.
much. So I tend to overload the PowerPoints with writing because I know that a lot of people read them separately who don't come to the session. So I'll read it. I'll sort of give you the sense if you can't see the words, but you can zoom in. You should be able to have the ability to zoom in on your screen on the PowerPoint. However you use Zoom, that should work for you fine on your own end. Critical thinking is not about being negative. Okay, so the first thing we want you to keep in mind. Some people make this mistake that critical thinking is about critique, not criticism. Okay, so critique is looking
Oh,
and critique is looking at the strength of the argument and trying to analyze why or how the argument that's being presented can be improved or needs to be thrown away. Criticism is where you attack someone personally, basically. That's the idea. A criticism is just where you're saying someone is wrong and attacking them. So you're playing the man more so than thinking about the strength of the argument, independent of who was presenting it.
what would you know about critical thinking, Will? You're just a teacher.
Yeah. Exactly. So that's the distinction. So when we give you feedback or when we push you to try and develop your research, we'll often be trying to critique you. And I know that sometimes what happens is, and we all do this. Sometimes we might take it personally. I just want you to keep in mind we're playing the argument, not you. So one of the other things that happens at the start of the year is someone will come, a student will say, oh, I'm really interested in doing topic X. And we'll say, oh, why are you interested in doing that? And they'll say, because I know a lot about it and I'm really interested in this. And I think this is the case and da da da. And then we'll say, oh, is it really true that that's the case? And how did you know that? And then the student will say, all right. And then we'll come back next week and say, okay, I've changed my topic. It's very clear that you didn't like that because you were picking holes in my idea there. And I said, no, we're just trying to get you to advance your thinking on that. So don't mistake criticism for critique. We're just trying with critique. We're asking you to develop the web of arguments, so to speak. Yeah. So what do we mean by critical thinking in terms of how do we go about doing it? So we're talking about analyzing an argument. What are the moving parts of the argument that you're presenting? What are the moving parts of the argument that you're finding in a particular piece of research that you're reading? So when you analyze something, you're breaking it apart into those different sections and saying, okay, so the conclusion that this article reaches is this, and here are the reasons that allow them to get to this. It might be the particular piece of data they've collected, or it might be the ethnographic research that they have engaged with to be able to reach their conclusion. So analysis is looking to what the structure is and being able to articulate the structure of the argument as clearly as you possibly can. And then evaluation is the next step. It's not just saying what the argument is, it's saying whether the argument is good. Okay. So it's not just about you reading a piece of research and saying Joe Blogg says that 9 out of 10 people really love chocolate flavored ice cream, and and they've concluded that chocolate is the best flavor in the world. Okay, that's sort of an analysis. But what we want you to go the next step and say, was it a good? Was it strong enough? And so your next step would be, well, they only interviewed people in one very, very small area of Melbourne from one ice cream parlor, and in that particular ice cream parlor, their chocolate has different ingredients in it, and it's very, very good. And so the data is skewed. There is a bias in the way in which this research was conducted, and so we cannot accept the finding on the strength of our critique of the way in which they carried out the research. Okay, so that's that second step that we're looking for that can be a little bit hard. How do you go about evaluating research? And it might be also, you might want to focus on the scope. So again, what I did there was looking at how they collected the data and saying, it might be that they need to broaden out the data set. Okay, so that's one way of evaluating it. Or saying, it was only conducted in America. It wasn't conducted here in Australia. And that problem that we've identified is here in Australia. Hopefully that's helping you think a little bit more about critical thinking and what we mean by that and how you can do this in a practical way. All right. Let's click forwards. All right, this is just a little bit of a taste of the final end of year rubric, just to show you putting the cart before the horse. This is what the end. This is what you're working towards at the end of the year, and this is the rubric that's used to assess your work in the written report. And there are some elements in the rubric for the oral as well, but just listen to the language here that they're using. It's pretty overt how critical thinking is one of the key things that you're going to be assessed on. A strong and coherent relationship between arguments and evidence. Okay, that's probably the hardest thing to be able to demonstrate in this subject. I think it's the hardest criterion in the rubric for students to be able to demonstrate. And if you're hoping to get a really strong mark, that's the area where you will probably want to put your focus in when we get to that point. But just thinking about that, the relationship between your arguments and evidence. How is it that you're building an argument and connecting the dots and drawing it all together to make it into a very, very strong argument? Okay. Sophisticated synthesis of different aspects of the investigation. So by synthesis here, we're talking about how you bring together all the disparate bits of research and hang it together. Okay. One of the things that some students might do is sometimes we compare apples with oranges. So we might say, we might do a very simple synthesis, but the synthesis isn't as strong as it might. So I'm just brainstorming, and let's say I'm wanting to look at, so Jessica, I'm just going to pick up on the topic we were talking about because it's in my brain. So you might want to look at the female Jewish experience in the 1600s, and you also just include the female experience of Jewish women from the 1800s as well, because you want to just sort of have a section, but to compare to contrast it and bring it out. But it might be that that's an invalid form. There's not enough of a reason to think that that's a fair comparison just because it might be Jewish women. There might be other things that won't allow you to make that comparison, that because the world of the 1900s rather 1800s 19th century 1800s is very, very different to the 1600s, and so it might seem like that comparison is reasonable, but the way in which you're synthesizing it's too simplistic. So synthesis, how are you bringing these different bits of research together? How are you combining and thinking through the web that you're building, and is it consistent? Are there flaws in the way in which you're making connections? We'll talk a little bit more about analysis and synthesis in the course. It won't be a focus today, but I'm just wanting to sort of throw a bit of this terminology at you. And yeah, relevant data coherently used as evidence. All right, so evidence or reason. How are you using evidence? It's one thing to have evidence, but it's another thing to ask whether you're using it well. Okay, is it really showing what you think it should be? That's the question that you will be faced with towards the end of the course. You'll do all of your research and you'll think that it shows a particular thing, but does it? Does the research or the evidence you get speak directly to the point that you're trying to get to? And again, have a look at the language here that they're using in the rubric. Highly articulate and comprehensively substantiated conclusions drawn from the findings. So some students will might do a survey, for instance. In the past, surveys have been very, very popular as a design study design or methodological approach, and they want to find out if it's right to let's say they want to find out if it's right to reintroduce the death penalty in Victoria. And so what they do is they go and do a survey to ask people if they think the death penalty should be introduced. And they find out that 80% of people that they survey say the death penalty should be introduced. And they conclude that it is right that the death penalty should be reintroduced. Now, that survey finding doesn't actually allow you to reach that conclusion. Just because a lot of people believe something should be right doesn't tell you whether or not something is right. Yeah? I hope that's clear. So sometimes people make the mistake of thinking that if I do a survey and I ask people if they think something is true, that'll show that that thing is true. It might be that all you've done is you've shown that idea is popular and that a lot of people think it's right, but you haven't looked at the reasons for why it is the case that reintroducing the death penalty should or should not be allowed. You might have to look at legislation, you might have to look at ethical arguments or whatever it might be. So do you see how in that case, that conclusion is not substantiated by the data or the evidence that's being brought there? So people are, a lot more would have to be added. All right, Julian, I'm over talking.
Great. That's helpful. I really enjoy the examples and past experiences from other students as well in their research. It brings to mind exactly what we're talking about more with these rubric terminology as well. So that's great.
Feel free to pause, interrupt, or ask a question if I've said something that's a little unclear or you'd like clarification on. More than happy to do that. And last one here, sorry, just the other point, insightful and comprehensive evaluation of the investigation. This is a really crucial thing that you'll be asked to do, that you don't need to think about it right now. You'll be asked to evaluate the strength of your own research. You're asked to be self-critical. And in your discussion, once you've done your research and you're analysing and looking at the findings and trying to say whether or not what you've done supports the conclusions you're trying to reach, you'll be asked to say whether or not the way in which you've conducted your research and the way in which you've mounted the argument in your research is as strong as it might be and what could have been done better. Okay, so that's
a really important point, and it probably connects up. I've just read the slides coming around the corner, but the idea of intellectual humility as well underscores that. So we're not trying in any way throughout in the way that we're approaching critical thinking. We're not trying to convince others that our research is the best no matter what, or that our argument is the best no matter what. We're trying to clarify what is the argument that we're presenting, to be able to articulate to ourselves, to others, to communicate that, and then working through, well, is it a good argument? Is the research design, is it appropriate? Does it align up with the intentions and the problem and the question at hand? Yeah. So that's the evaluative aspect of it. Yeah.
All right. Okay. If there's anything, I just put this at the start because I know that sometimes online lessons, our brain, we fizzle out when they go too long and you're having to listen to someone talk like me. If there's anything you take away from this, the bare minimum I want you to take away is this PowerPoint slide here, which is that if you're not sure about what we're talking about with critical thinking, or you're not sure or how you could demonstrate that, or whatever it might be, there's one single piece of advice I would give you is how are you incorporating these words into your essay? Okay. If you want to improve the critical thinking element of your research, you need to be using the language of argument. If X is the case, then Y must be true. Therefore, if, however, so, only, thus, therefore. So whenever you say thus or therefore, it means you're hitting a conclusion or you're really bringing your point home. Okay. If is when you use the word if, you're actually introducing a possible premise or a reason that will support the argument. Given that's when you jump from one premise to another premise in order to then jump to a conclusion. All of these words here, and they're listed in the course as well, a few different ones as well, are indicators in your writing that you're presenting an argument of some sort. You're using whatever it might be to get to a conclusion, and then you'll use that conclusion as a premise to then get to another point that you're wanting to get to. Many years ago, I haven't been able to find. I did a quick search, but many years ago, I remember reading an article where they were assessing. What is it? Is it the GAMSAT? What's the? I've forgotten the name of the test in America for students wanting to go to university. I've forgotten the name of it. The SATs. That's right. Which used to be made in Melbourne by a company called ACER. In any case, they were trying to make it more efficient to mark the essays because they had lots and lots of students, and so instead of getting students to do it, they basically, for the written essay, all they did was they just took the language of argument. They just looked for these words and just got a computer algorithm to sift through everyone's essays, and on the basis of that, they ranked students. And then they got actual teachers to go and mark the essays. And they discovered that there was virtually a one-to-one correspondence. I'm overstating the case here, but the point is that you can almost predict a student's performance just on the basis of how often you use the language of argument. So before you, one simple way to self-assess or check your own work, so to speak, and look at whether or not you're on the right track is to look at whether or not you're using these kinds of things. Are you using language that we need when we present an argument? And making it overt. The other point I'll make quickly here, and I make it later on, is that you might have an argument, but it's not explicit. So sometimes we can write in a way that we're not so heavy-handed and we use these words and that we do have an argument. But what I would urge you to do is try to make it as explicit as possible in your writing. Try and make it clear to your reader, because it's not just me or Julian who have watched you develop your thinking over the course of the year. It'll be people who've never heard about your research. You want to make it clear and explicit. So if you can do that now, get into the habit of making it really upfront and easy to understand in your writing, then all the better. All right. I'll go to the next slide. The other point I wanted to make in terms of building arguments, which we've touched on a bit, making assumptions, it's the big one. So I know a number of you, I've had that moment with some of you in the past few weeks where someone will be saying, and this is a problem and we need to work out how to solve it. And I'll ask, is it really a problem? How did you know that is a problem? How did you know that the American curriculum is inherently racist? I mean, you've jumped to a solution. You're trying to work out how best to improve the curriculum, but how did you know that it wasn't working? And the students go, well, I just thought it wasn't. So no, because and so then they've had to go and have a look and do some research on the curriculum and find out if there's any research to justify the belief that there is a problem there. And then once you've gone into that assumption that you've made, you discover this whole world of detail and possible avenues for research. So sometimes we all make assumptions, and you do have to make certain assumptions in your thinking, but you can't. Some assumptions which are critical, like assuming that there is a problem that you're going to try and research, you can't assume that your research problem is necessarily the case. So how did you know that there's a problem with Indigenous curriculum or whatever it might be. What evidence do you have to suggest that? And then what have you read? And how can you prove that? And what sort of quotes or references or data can you gather in order to be able to show that that is or isn't the case? Yeah. I don't know if does anyone do people feel like they've fallen into that trap? Yeah, sorry,
Or
Julian.
has anyone found any assumptions, either in their own thinking or in some other study that you've looked at,
Yeah.
in someone else's argument? Have they assumed something to be the case without really explicitly saying that, without stating it? Because if you're able to find that, you're being critical. You're analyzing arguments and evidence and research papers, or you're analyzing your own argument. Um, I yeah, a simple thing like many people might assume and wake up this morning that things are the same as they were yesterday without, you know, reading the newspapers and watching the news or something like that. So that's an assumption.
It's a fair
Um,
assumption, though, I suppose. That's the other
yeah,
point. That some assumptions are good or reasonable, because most people would accept it as true on the that there's sufficient evidence, whereas other assumptions are not strong enough. And so the question for you in doing your research is to pose that question. I've assumed this. Is that a reasonable thing to assume? Or is it something that I need to amass a little bit of uh, data or whatever it might be, evidence base, in order for my reader or listener to accept that point?
yeah.
Yeah.
If I was investigating, say, education, maybe I assume that critical thinking is good for education without really stating that why it would be good or exploring, what the research and evidence says about critical thinking and its relationship to learning and education. If I'm not exploring that, then I'm not trying to look underneath the rock and see what are the foundations of my key claims. So you can do that as well in what you're reading.
Yeah. All right. Look, let's uh, go to the next one. And this is the other point: making assumptions. Um, sometimes we make assumptions. You don't have to, pretend that if you're making certain assumptions, it require and you want to acknowledge that it requires a certain amount of intellectual humility. It might be that you're writing an argument, and you have to make certain assumptions in order to get to the focus that you're doing. You don't have to pretend that your assumption is absolutely right. That you don't have to circle the wagons and just become very aggressive, and just use techniques to force your reader to accept the assumption. You might simply say, "This is an assumption that we're going to make for the purposes of the research that we're conducting." It may be that this assumption is not a reasonable one, but we are assuming that it is the case, for that X, Y, or Z. And if this is the case, then we must ask this next point, or we must go and look at something in particular. And so it might be that you will need to make certain assumptions, or because you can't sort of, in the chain of reasons, you can't have a reason for a reason for a reason going back to infinity. And sometimes you might need to just say, look, we're going to say that it is the case, that X, Y is true. We think that that's a reasonable assumption to make on this particular basis for this particular reason. But it might be that that's not that turns out to be wrong. In which case, the rest of this research that we're conducting, there might be some weaknesses with what we're doing if that's not true. And so, being able to be open with your own research, you don't have to say we're absolutely 100% right, and anyone who questions this is an idiot. You don't need to use rhetorical skills to convince your audience of the strength of the argument that you're doing. You need to present the most convincing argument, and you're able to acknowledge where there might be some weaknesses. Okay. So it's disastrous in this subject if you think that by being convincing you need to use rhetorical skills. Okay, it is not the case. You just need to present the argument and show it as transparently as possible. Present the data and the research, or however it is that you've gone about doing what you do, and all the steps that you make. As long as you're making it transparent and acknowledging that certain steps might not be as strong as they might be, that's okay. All right. And if anything, it's an indicator of a much higher level of critical thinking if you're able to have that intellectual humility in the way you go about prosecuting your case. So I hope, and just even that tentative language. So some students I've noticed who are able to put forward an argument, they tend to be a little hesitant, if you like, in their language, and they're putting forward their argument. They're saying, look, if it's true that this data which we've gathered, or if it's true that the way in which this person in this journal has expressed themselves, then we can conclude that da 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 da. So that hesitant, if this is the case, and perhaps if that, then we might be able to conclude there. So using that kind of language where you're not trying to push your own agenda, so to speak. You're just saying, look, if these things lock into place, then that allows us to say this. But of course, it might still be wrong. Okay, so having that self-critical element to your writing is perfectly fine. But don't go over the top. Some students have gone to the other side and say, everything I'm saying is stupid. I don't know what I'm talking about because I'm just in year 12 and so this is probably all wrong. But anyway, here goes. That's not useful either, because that's talking about yourself. You're talking about your own knowledge. So we're not interested in how you feel about yourself as a writer. We're interested in what can be said on the basis of the evidence that is there. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope that it's a little bit of an odd point to make. I don't know, some students have found that a little bit of an odd point, but I think it's an important one and I think it'll become clearer as you go along. Yeah, the other point I've mentioned TEDx. So I'm sure that we've all been bombarded over the years with TEDx presentations, and a lot of the TEDx presentations are very rhetorical. A lot of them, it's sort of these presentations. Some of them are done by academics, but more often than not, the style that we've come to associate with TEDx is more rhetorical, where people are trying to convince others to change their mind. They're not presenting facts and data. They're using stage managed persuasive skills, if you like. And you don't need to do that in this subject. You can just present your research. And in the oral at the end of the year, no one is assessing you on how stylish your presentation is and how many fireworks you've got in the background. And if you've got, dancers and mascots, no one cares about the pyrotechnics. It's about how well you develop your case. So keep that in mind. Some students think that they have to go and do a debating tournament of some sort, and this is the opposite of that. You're not trying to win an argument, you're just trying to present the best arguments. Hope that sort of resonates. All right, so we're talking about, all of a sudden we've been talking about arguments. What on earth are we talking about when we talk about an argument? It seems like the most obvious thing in the world, and it's actually not. Arguments can be quite complex, and there are a range of different ways to present an argument. But the first thing to know is that an argument, at the very minimum, has two components. It's got a conclusion, your point or claim, the thing that you want to get to, and the reason that you're giving in order to show that that claim that you're making is true. Okay, so here's a simple one. If the sun is out, then it will be warm. Okay, there's a nice, simple, easy argument. So we have an argument, but the next question is it a good argument? Okay. Is this argument true? Well, there are lots of ways to try and analyze this argument and think about whether it's a good one. Are the terms in it clear? What do we mean by the sun out? Does that mean that the sun is because the sun is always out? Or do we mean if the sun is over the horizon and visible to this particular part of the Earth? So there's a term that's been a bit unclear and used in a very, very loose way. What do we mean by warm? Is 19 degrees warm? Well, if you're in England, that's a boiling hot day. But if 19 is in, Bermuda, then that's freezing cold. What do we mean by warm? What temperature range are we talking about? Um, and then the second question that you can, next question you can pose then is you can ask situations in which true. For a point warm, but the sun is not out. You could be inside in the middle of the night and have the heater on. So so that means that it's not always the case that the sun needs to be out in order for it to be warm. So is that argument trying to say more or less? So we've got all these clarifiers and qualifiers that we're thinking about. What situation is this true or not? What does the language it's being precise. We could ask for some precision.
Gonna jump in there, Will. I think you're cutting out a little bit. Might turn off your video if you like. That's probably taking up some of your bandwidth. Might jump in if I can move on to the next page. I think we might have lost Will. Is everyone else? Was it just me, or did other people lose Will there? Maybe just write in the chat.
So thinking about all the different components for generating a good argument, and hopefully that'll help you in building the web of that will be in your own research. How is it that you hang all these things together, and how do they link together? How do these bits and pieces that you're reading from all these different articles, how do they fit together, and how will you build it into your own piece of research? The other point I'll just say, hopefully you've enjoyed the Lego theme in the course, and the idea for the Lego theme is that you building your research is exactly like playing Lego. Each block that you create, each sentence you write, is another brick in the wall of the Lego piece that you're building, and that metaphor is something I want you to keep in mind when you're thinking about the argument that you're constructing or the research you're building. How does this little Lego piece link to all the other little Lego pieces? All right, Pullman model. Let's go. So there's a bit of different, few different bits of terminology that are thrown around here. So don't be overwhelmed by it, but it's pretty simple to grasp. So don't be put off by the words if they're using different ones. So grounds, another word for grounds is premise or reason. Okay, and warrant here, as you can see, is the thing that intervenes between your reason and the claim or conclusion you're trying to reach. Okay, so what do we mean by a warrant? A warrant is a reason that links your grounds to a claim. Okay, so let's say, in that example that we had previously, the sun is out and then it will be warm. It sounds like it's a reasonably simple argument, but if we had a warrant to try and make that a little stronger, we could think of another reason to show why this argument really does allow us to get to that claim. And so it might be that we have a couple more reasons called warrants in order to strengthen and link that premise to the claim. But I hope that helps. All right, let's click
So,
forward. Here we
I mean,
go.
we're going to talk
Yes.
about this and work through this for the rest of the session, really. So this is our real focus in the coming
Yeah.
40 minutes or so. So we'll have take the time. We'll go over a lot of these concepts as well and familiarize ourselves just through the context and examples and things like that.
Yeah. Um, all right. So when you have a reason and it supports a claim of some sort, or grounds rather, and it supports a claim, um, the warrant strengthens the link between the grounds and the claim. Okay. Um, so you can see in this nice example here. Here is a nice. So let's have. I'll just read through the grounds and how it supports the claim, and then we can see how the warrant uh, strengthens the grounds. So, in their paper, Cummings et al. Discuss how email communications are an inferior means of maintaining personal relationships. However, their study does not account for technological, demographic, or modality limitations. Okay, and that gets to the claim. Additional research on computer-mediated communication needs to be conducted to be better to better understand how online interactions affect relationships. Okay. Now, for this argument here, we've got a warrant which it reinforces and strengthens the link from the grounds. So when a paper lacks a certain perspective, more research would be beneficial to prove its claims. Okay. So do you see how the warrant there? So you've got the grounds. It's presenting the finding in the research, uh, and how the research has a gap in the literature, right? And so the result is, well, this research has got a gap in the literature. We need to research it. But then they've made explicit a warrant which says because a gap in the literature is evident, a gap in the literature is a reasonable justification for pushing our research focus in a particular way. Okay, so you see how they've made that. So it might be implicit. You might, when you're writing yourself, you might sort of implicitly just think that your reader will assume that. But in this example, they've made it explicit. They said, hang on, because this paper's got a gap in the literature, this means that it's a gap that needs to be filled. I'm paraphrasing. So I hope that's nice and simple, and just bringing those steps out. All right, so a warrant strengthens the link between a reason and its conclusion. Now, sometimes your warrant may need to be justified itself. You might need a reason for the warrant. So you might want to think of additional support to strengthen your warrant. So let's have a look here. It says there that the backing provides some strengthening for the warrant. A thorough review of the literature has shown you that no further research has been done to clarify the effects of whatever it is, which can have on personal relationships. Okay, so we've started off with the grounds. The paper's got a gap, so we should do it. And then the warrant has come in and said, if there is a gap in the literature, that's reasonable. That leads to us to be, it's reasonable to think that that's an avenue for possible research. And then the backing is a second kind of reason, because it's taking into account that, hang on, just because this paper hasn't filled in the gap doesn't mean that there isn't other research out there that's filled in this particular gap. And then the backing covers that and says, it's not just this paper. We've done a systematic literature, we've done a literature review, and we've looked and we found that no one else has really focused on this. And so that is another reason why the gap in the literature that we're hoping to focus on needs to be done. All right. Now, I hope this is not bamboozling people. I hope that's sort of going okay. Do people feel confident with this? Could people give me a little bit of a sense in I don't know if people just in the chat just give me a sense of how you're going, if you're finding this a bit, maybe I don't know if this has got the thumbs up or thumbs down in there, but if it's going okay, just give me a yes, please, just to let me know you're. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you. Yep. Thank you. Okay. Good. All right. It's nice to know that people are there still listening. You haven't just completely passed out with boredom.
Another kind of, for those that
Yet.
like the instrument analogies, sometimes people talk about, what's that French, the accordion, you kind of um, stretching out by
Oh
uh,
yeah.
providing further reasons, warrants, and back-ins for the key claims that are made. So you're kind of in that warrant and back-in space, you're actually expanding and really coming under the microscope with what is supporting, what's the connection between the grounds and the claim, and what's supporting that, and what are the grounds for that support as well. So there's that element of expanding and elaborating that's important in this move as well. What do we got next? A qualifier. What's that
Um, a
in the proof book?
qualifier.
Yeah.
Is it small?
Oh no,
Um,
that was perfect before.
sorry.
No, I was
Yeah.
looking. The next movement in this chain of reasoning is called a qualifier. Is that what the slide is suggesting?
Yes, it is. Sorry. Sorry. The font size is a bit small, but you should be able to zoom in. Uh, I think it's Control and then roll of the mouse. Um, yeah. So what is a qualifier? A qualifier shows that a claim may not always be true in all circumstances. Um, a qualifier helps your audience understand that you know that there are instances where your claim may not be correct. So when and where what you're saying is true or false. So you will be using qualifiers quite a lot in developing your research and expressing the research problem. So again, just thinking off the top of my head, you might be interested in looking at mental health. And it might be that there is research to show that there is significant mental health issues during the lockdown for people who have asked to stay at home, and you're interested in looking at how the lockdown is affecting people's mental health. But all the research that you're reading is focusing on America because the American lockdowns have been more sustained and long term, or something along those lines. And the data out there is showing that it's affected people in America, but the qualifier is that there hasn't been enough done on the effects of the lockdown during the Melbourne lockdown, which went for 100 days or whatever it was. And so you're not interested in looking at all lockdowns. You're wanting to look at the Melbourne example because it was unique and specific and went for a particular sustained period. It was a sustained period of time. And you want to see if the findings from America align with would be replicable, or would find something similar in the Australian context. So do you see how those clarifiers are sort of limiting the scope, if you like, saying we're looking at this, we're not looking at over there. And also the findings that were found in the American context may not leap over to the Melbourne context. So you see how qualifiers are just making sure that you're not making broad general claims that are true for everyone and anything. It's when is this going to be true or acceptable?
Mm,
So you might have data that shows that something is true for a particular thing, but you've got to make it clear that that data might not allow you to say it's true for another situation or another time.
mm. I often think about the qualifier as a type of bracket that you're able to place within um, the implications of your argument.
Yeah.
How are you able to confine that? What specificities do you bring to your argument that would make it more transparent and more accurate as well? Obviously, we don't want to overgeneralize our claims because then we'll come to it soon, but someone just comes through and gives a rebuttal, and that's significant. And if someone's able to show counter examples that go against your claim, then your claim is not a strong claim. So the qualifier can be an important mechanism that you can introduce into your writing that would give more substantiation to your argument and make it more reliable more reasonable or plausible.
Yeah. And I think this example, it's a nice and simple one. I'll just go through it just quickly in case we're bamboozling you a bit. I think this is a nice example. So let's say your grounds is you hear barking and howling in the distance, and you want to be able to conclude that means there must be some dogs nearby. All right. Now you've got a warrant for your grounds. So dogs are animals that bark and howl. Okay. So that allows you to say there must be dogs nearby. All right. And then the warrant has some backing. You know that your neighbor Tom has two large German shepherds. And so that builds up and strengthens the body of evidence that you have to get to that claim. There must be dogs nearby. But it can't be generally true because it might be that you're in Tasmania and Tasmanian devils also bark like dogs. And so it's not true so simply because there's a bit of an exception to the rule. So if you're in Tasmania, because you're in Tasmania, it might not be a dog. It might be a Tasmanian devil. So that qualifier is really asking. Okay, so we're in Melbourne. We're in a place where there are no other animals that bark. So you're adding that little qualifier to try and strengthen and limit the focus because this argument might not be true in Tasmania. People who say, "Oh, I hear dogs. I hear barking and howling in the distance. There must be dogs nearby." Sorry, you're in Tasmania. It could be a Tasmanian devil as well. But if you're thinking about those possible rebuttals or possible circumstances which won't make that true, then if you incorporate them and admit them and are transparent, then that'll really strengthen your argument. All right. I shall move forwards. All right. So let's say you have a really great argument and you've got some evidence and facts as part of your grounds, and you've got a good warrant which provides or explains the link between your ground and the claim or conclusion you're trying to reach. You've also got backing, you've got reason to accept the warrant, and you've got a qualifier. Does this mean, so I'd be curious to get a yes or no. Do you think that if you have all of these things, that must be the strongest argument you could possibly offer? If you incorporated all the elements of an argument that we've included, do you think that that would be enough for you to be able to think that the argument that you have is as good as it possibly could be? You've given every single reason under the sun to say that something is true. Do you think, yeah? Okay, thank you. Does anyone else think, you couldn't think of any other, like every single reason you could possibly think of to get to a conclusion? Would people agree that you couldn't make an argument better than that once you've done that? Any takers? All right. Oh, good. How come, Sarah? I would really like to know what if you can. I don't know if you're confident enough to speak, or if your mic's working, or if not, you can pop it in the chat. That's fine. Either way is fine. Right.
So
I would be inclined to agree. Yeah.
yeah, what else are we looking for? Um,
I'd be inclined to agree with you, Sarah. I think that in order to make your argument complete, if you will, is to look at alternate perspectives that may disagree with your own point. So you put forward your argument and you have all of those reasons and you build up a really nice position, but it might be that there is an equally strong argument for the opposite of the position that you're trying to argue for. It might be that there are some reasons that go against your own reasons that you haven't looked at. And so you need, when you're trying, oh, hang on. Yeah, okay, thank you. Sorry, I jumped the gun a bit, Sarah. I didn't give you enough time. Just because you've incorporated all the elements that constitute a good argument and you've explored every possible reason, so it doesn't necessarily mean you've created a very holistic argument. Okay, that's a nice point. So sometimes we create an argument that is not connecting to other points. So we're not being systematic and coherent. That's a really, really nice point, Sarah. And that's something I think we all do. When we're evaluating an argument, we might want to test it against other things that we know and other things that have been said in different places. So that's a really, really great point. Yeah. I suppose that's part of what we do when we evaluate students' work. Often I find myself doing that. So sometimes people will flip and they'll say something is the case and they find some research that actually show the opposite, and then they'll sort of have this moment where they're sort of trying to say that something is the case and isn't the case at the same time. And then it's, well, can you really do that? Can you really hold thing that is true and not true at the same time? Just because you're saying it at different points in your research doesn't mean that you've not created an inconsistency of some sort. So yeah, that's a really lovely point, Sarah. I think that's true. And I suppose, to my mind, also that's part of the warrant. It's when we're building the warrant and the backing. That's one way of trying to bring this argument to connect with other parts, or bringing it out and to connect it to in a more holistic way to other things that we're saying. But I think that regardless of how strong the reasons are that you have to reach a conclusion, you need to be able to consider an alternate perspective or a rebuttal. Okay, are there any counter arguments that go against what you're saying? Have you considered them, and are they good enough to knock down your own argument? Is there a rebuttal out there that you can imagine that your reader or listener might formulate in their mind, and can you preempt, so to speak, and explain why the argument that they, or rebuttal they're going to offer, might not be as strong as they think? Okay, so part of your justification is to think outside of your argument and look at what, think external to it, if you like, and think how it might be received and how you could respond to that objection or rebuttal. Okay, so I think that let's have a look here.
Can I jump in on the next page there, Will? And
yeah, can you click forwards, or do you want me to do it?
I think you have to give me the wheel.
Oh, sorry, I thought you've got co-host rights.
Yeah, I think there can only be one host.
Okay, I'm making you presenter now. How about that?
Yes.
There you go.
Oh,
it's you.
Where did the presentation go?
Oh, okay. Sorry, I've made you host.
That's okay. I'll pull up wherever it is. Let me. That's cool. Just a second there.
Sorry, I just put it back up.
Oh, cool. There we go. Can you give me the wheel though? I want the wheel.
Yeah. Sorry. Yep. So
okay.
Yeah.
I've just.
There you go. It's over to you.
Okay.
It's over to you.
Okay. I'm just going to bring back that slide a bit. So bear with me a moment. The main thing I want to bring it back is to start to see the line of reasoning that's involved in this process of thinking. So I'm just going to squip through all this. We've covered this. So I start to see a really distinctive line of reason that comes through here. And the warrant and the backing is working towards supporting this line of reasoning, and the qualifier is setting the context. And I see this as a progress in our thinking about a particular subject or question or whatever it might be, a justification for a research field. So it's starting with the key claim and moving through the reasons, um, unpacking those reasons for looking for warrants and back in, qualifying, and then working through, well, what's the best rebuttal? What's the best counter evidence or argument that could be made against this? Really test it out, and then try to respond to that to really test out the reliability of the argument. Okay, so what we're going to do now is just practice through this line of reasoning together a little bit, to get more familiar with it and to feel comfortable in working through that, and applying this technique, I suppose, to arguments. So a lot of what Will has been talking about so far, it underscores what the critical thinking test is really about, and the subject as well. This idea of the Toulmin model that he's been talking through.
Sorry, Julian, can you put into presenter modes so that we can zoom?
What's presenter mode?
So slide presentation.
So you're not viewing this at the moment?
Yeah, hang on. No, I can see it, but it's a bit hard to.
It's too small.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Zoom in a bit.
Yeah. So if you put it into presentation mode, I think, or is it already in slide presentation mode?
Don't know. I'm going to give that link here.
That's right.
Let me pull up that link, and this is just a snap photo of the critical thinking test from last year. And you can click on that if you want. There's all the critical thinking tests from previous years and things like that. I'm just looking at question 4 from last year, and you'll see the main idea for evaluation is the claim banning mobile phones in schools will improve student learning and well-being. So that's written here. And then you'll see a whole list of arguments for and a whole list of arguments against, or for and against there. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. Some are stronger than others. They're kind of they're all in the same ballpark, but they approach claims for this, grounds for this reason in different ways. And the question is really asking you to scrutinize these and to develop your own argument. So you can draw upon these reasons for and against, to make your own argument or position. Okay. So I just went through this and then tried to apply what Will has been talking about so far with, it's called the Toulmin model of thinking here. So I just kind of, in my own thinking, I wanted to see this line of thinking and reasoning come through in the way that I applied various relating reasons and unpack those reasons as well. So I thought actually, and this is interesting because I don't know what's the current status of mobile phones in schools at the moment. I think it's been a policy that's been introduced, but I don't know if it's actually been taken up by schools. It's hard to tell in this current environment. It'd be good to get a sense of what other students are experiencing in their schools around the state with this. But I wanted to argue, I just kind of looked through all these various reasons for and against, and I wanted to try and pick out the one that I think is the most convincing, um, and the position that I wanted to make for that. So I thought, okay, well, I actually don't think banning of phones is a good idea for improving students' learning and well-being. So the claim I wanted to make, if I was to respond to a question like that, would be that banning mobile phones in schools will not improve student learning and well-being. And then I had to work through, okay, what's a good reason for that? What's the best reason I could think of? And so I kind of looked through all these arguments that were presented against this, and I tried to pick out the one that I thought I wanted to run with, the one that I thought would be most relevant and supportive of the key claim, I suppose. And for me, that was the ease of getting information on a mobile phone allows students more time to focus on thinking and problem solving. So that's my reason. That's my grounds or reason. At the moment, it's trying to support this key claim here. But obviously, it needs some further unpacking, elaboration, and evidence to substantiate that reason. The next move is to go to the warrant here. What is, there's lots of arrows here, but what's the logical connection between the ground and the claim being made? So in this, I kind of read through the claim and the grounds, and I want to pull out from that what actually is the connection, what's the work being done, what's needed to be stated in order for the claim to be logically supported by the grounds. So I just kind of unpacked that in my own thinking. I thought, okay, well, I think it's this. I think it's thinking and problem solving skills are primary skills and capabilities for improvement in learning. And I hope you can see how that's trying to logically connect up the grounds with the claim. Okay. My next move is to go, okay, what's the warrant based in? So I kind of work out here now. Can I provide some further unpacking if there's any unstated assumptions in the warrant or something that needs to be made more explicit? If I can pull that out from stating some backing for the warrant. So I thought, okay, well, if students have strong thinking and problem skills, they will be best able to apply these in new situations and learning. There's a whole variety of ways that you could approach this and a whole variety of arguments you could make. And at the moment, we're just concentrating on the structure here and just trying to see that line of reasoning at play and how it is being supported and tested. Here is my qualifier for this. Okay, well, maybe there's going to be in some situations there needs to be some qualification about this claim. Some situations and classes, teachers may need to impose strict restrictions on mobile phone use. However, this is up to the digression of the teacher and good learning. The other thing I might wish to make here in the qualifier is that so far I've only been thinking about improved student learning. In my grounds and warrant and backing and thinking, I haven't really addressed well-being here. So I'd probably want to say that and make that really explicit. Maybe my key claim is not really supporting every aspect of the claim. Maybe it's just supporting improved student learning, and I could bracket out well-being. Maybe I need to think of some other argument or grounds that would address that concept of well-being. Because at the moment, as it stands, I'm not really doing any work to support that claim. I'm only really supporting the claim that it will not improve student learning. Okay. For my rebuttal, I just picked out from the critical thinking test, I just pulled out one of these 4 arguments and placed it in there. And one of those was students rely too much on looking up answers on the internet instead of trying to work out the answers themselves. I think that's a reasonable rebuttal to explore and follow up on. And I don't want to choose rebuttals that are easy to knock down. I really want to test out my argument. So I think that that's a fairly important rebuttal to consider. And then that kind of, I had to think about it a little bit more and explore my understanding a little bit. And I came up with this. So my counter argument to the rebuttal was to set learning tasks where it is possible to simply look up the answers is an outdated understanding of teaching, which neglects the complexities of thinking and problem solving. So I hope, and obviously you can evaluate my argument as well if you think it's not very good or it's missing something. Definitely pull me up here. As a kind of a model for the Toulmin template, I also want to note there should be a sense of relevance that's connecting up all of this. The move should be responding, so obviously the counter argument should be responding specifically to some important aspect of the rebuttal. It's not good practice to respond to a rebuttal with just kind of something that's vaguely related. You really want to pull out the relevance of the reason or objection that's being made to be able to respond to that. So I think Will kind of talked about it a little bit. There's this line of reasoning that should align as you think through the problem or question and develop your argument. Okay. So that was one of my arguments. And if I was in a critical thinking test like this and I had this question, I would try and think through it like this, and this would formulate my paragraph or 2 response that this question is asking for. So the question itself is asking, having considered the arguments offered, offer your position for or against the proposition. So I would just write that up. This is my first sentence. This is my second sentence. So maybe I should number it. The first, second sentence. This is my third sentence. I can't see that. Third, this is my fourth sentence, the backing. This is my fifth sentence, the qualifier. The rebuttal is my sixth sentence, and this is my seventh sentence. So I hope you can see how if I'm in a situation like that, so there will be the critical thinking test, but also you'll be applying this to your weekly work as well. So if you're in it, whatever position you're in where it's asking you to develop an argument based on evidence and reason, you can apply this and move through those steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and that would structure your sentence, your paragraph response. Maybe it's 2 paragraphs. I don't know. It depends on the situation a little bit. Okay. I'm going to show you another argument that I did in response to that same question, but I intentionally tried to mess around with it a little bit. And so I want you to apply some of the stuff that we've been thinking about with Will and myself to see what do you think is wrong with this argument that's being made and presented to you in front of you and your screen now. So it starts with the claim banning mobile phones in schools will improve student learning and well-being. If you want to, as I'm talking in the chat room or in discussion, if there's anything you want to point out that you think is problematic in this movement of reasoning, or something that's missing, or something that's quite not aligning. Okay, so the grounds for this claim are the incidences of cyberbullying will decrease when students do not have access to mobile phones during the day. So this ground is aiming to support this claim. The warrant that's trying to make the connection between the grounds and the claim is that mobile phones distract students from their learning. Okay. The back-in that's trying to substantiate the strength of the warrant is that distractions in learning negatively impact student learning and well-being. Okay. Then we move through the qualifier. Other support for students for cyber safety will be needed through schools and community programs. And the next line is to move towards the rebuttal here. The rebuttal to this argument is the ease of getting information on a mobile phone allows students more time to focus on thinking and problem solving. And the counter argument made against that rebuttal is that students rely too much on looking up answers on the internet instead of trying to work out the answers themselves. Okay. So in the next couple of minutes, have a read of that. Where do you think there's something kind of, sus about this line of argument? If you can, and see if you can see where you think it's not really doing the job that it should be doing. Where is the grounds supporting the claim? Is the warrant making that connection between the grounds and the claim? Is the back-in working to support a warrant? Some of this might be doing important things, some of it might be doing not so important things. What do you think is going wrong here? And if anything, what's going right? Is there anything good about this? Thanks, Sarah. So the warrant doesn't really link the claim and the grounds, yeah. So the claim is about banning mobile phones in schools will improve student learning and well-being. The reason for that, incidences of cyberbullying will decrease when students do not have access to mobile phones. There should be some connection between cyberbullying and well-being and learning, improved well-being and learning in the warrant. And the warrant is not doing that. The warrant is kind of just throwing in some more information and not really showing the logical connection between the two. So yeah, Sarah, well done. It's not really doing what the warrant should be doing in this situation. Also, Jessica, thank you. The grounds is based on the assumption that cyberbullying will decrease. Yeah. So that would be an excellent rebuttal really to explore as well. Instead of this rebuttal, that would be a more pertinent rebuttal to investigate and elaborate on. And that's where we talk about how we should see that the relevance that works through the middle of this. If you're starting to throw different things and elements into that, it muddies the water and doesn't really show the line of reasoning that should be apparent. Yeah, also the rebuttal isn't really disputing anything effectively. Yeah. So what is the rebuttal rebutting to? It's not quite clear. Unlike the previous one where you could kind of see the rebuttal trying to do some work or response to the grounds that have been made or the warrant or backing in some way, it's trying to respond to that. It's not so directly linked in this rebuttal. Yeah. Okay. So I think the important thing is to see and understand the processes, those 7 steps to work through in articulating an argument and then working through to the evaluation of rebuttal and counter argument. Before we go on, because in the next part, we're going to actually just get you to have 10, 15 minutes to jump into your research, your particular field, and work towards applying this very same model to some particular claim in your field of study, or even a claim for why the research problem is a problem. Any argument that you need to do at the moment in your current part of research, whatever you kind of choose, but it has to come from your field of research. We want you to spend the next 10 or 15 minutes in trying to, say, articulate what the actual claim is. I think just one ground would be enough. Don't try and overdo it with 2 or 3 grounds. Let's just focus on one of the grounds at the moment. And then you'll start to work through the various steps. So, yeah, is that enough time? I'm probably going to give maybe 10 minutes. We kind of have to reset our thinking, get away from the computer if you have to. Pull open your particular field of study, your topic. What is a claim that you've come across, for instance, or that you're making in your justification for the research? So that would be your first step. What's the reason or evidence that's going to support that? Step 3, what is your warrant that's going to connect those two together? Step 4, what's the back-in for that warrant? Step 5, what's your qualifier? Particular context, situation, bracketing out any other overgeneralizations, and then work through to your rebuttal and counter argument. Now, this actual task is, I think, as Will has popped in there, is going to be actually one of the main tasks in the upcoming weeks. So there's an overlap here. What you're doing at the moment is going to be filtered back into your work and weekly tasks as well. And you'll find that happens a little bit as well throughout this course. Often we need to reiterate and use something again. And so there'll be that crossover. But yeah, how do you feel? Do you think 10 minutes is to work through that? We're just going to go quiet for a moment. Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah, even a bit longer would be fine, I suppose. What I was thinking, Julian, is people might like to have a go at the task, which I've linked in the chat box, and then post your response in the course blog, and then we can sort of have a look at it, and we can also have a look at how everyone else is approaching it as well. Um, yes, absolutely, Sarah, you'll have access. We'll make the recording available.
Mm.
Um,
I'm just going
Look,
to press stop now. So,
yeah, excellent. Look,
okay.
what I wanted to